How's it going? It's Drew Blazik, and we're going to do government actions in economics. And we'll see the impact it has on price controls and taxes. So let's get straight into our models here. I will be using the sim method again, which will light up green. You could download the Excel file. And the first portion, the part of this is dynamic. You could change it. The taxes, I changed the supply and demand curve, which is a little more complicated. So that's not robust. All right, first what we got a supply and demand curve here. So we have a table of quantity demanded, quantity supplied. We got certain prices, and as you can see, as the price goes up, consumers are willing to purchase more at a lower price, and the quantity goes down. At a low price, suppliers aren't going to supply that many, and it goes up as the price goes up. They're willing to create. If you're making lemonade and someone's willing to pay you $100, and everybody's willing to pay you $100 per cup, you're going to produce a lot of lemonade, and you're probably going to quit your job. If you're only getting a quarter per cup, you might make a couple lemonades, right? Just for friends. So it's going up. Where the price at $10 is equal, where the quantities are equal to each other, that's the equilibrium price, and that's the equilibrium quantity. So if we go here, the equilibrium price is $10, and the equilibrium quantity is 8. This is our government control here of a floor or ceiling that you're going to be able to use and see where the quantities are if it impacts it. So this is robust. Let's look at the ceiling. Let's do a couple examples. Let's say, remember the price is $10. So I'm going to do a ceiling of 12, and let's see what happens here. I'm going to put it at $12. What is a ceiling? A price ceiling is government says you cannot charge above. It's a ceiling. You can't charge above a certain price. What does that mean? If you can't charge above a certain price, well, they're selling it for $10, and the government's saying you can't sell it for more than 12. So that is non-binding. That's not binding at all. That has no impact on our good. So that would be not binding. No, it's not effective. That government control price ceiling. So if we look at our price ceiling, it must be below equilibrium. If it was at 10, it's at equilibrium, it would have no effect. So let's put a price of 7, and your Excel sheet's probably going to have a different price. Let's do the same thing as I do. Drag that down to 7, and now look what we got going on. We're not at equilibrium, right? I can't go above. So now it's effective, it's binding. This is important. This is a binding price ceiling. And what we want to do is look at this quantity of that curve. That's quantity demanded. Look at the demand curve. And then this is quantity supplied. So we're supplying 5 and we're demanding 11. Makes sense, right? A ceiling, an effective ceiling, is below equilibrium. Therefore, that means it's going to be a lower price. That means they do this rent control in New York. That means more demanders want more of the good because it's cheaper. We want 11, so we plug these numbers in. However, at a lower price, suppliers are supplying less. So let's plug those in. Quantity demanded is at 11. Quantity supplied is at 5. Next, we want to see is what did this create? What we have here is we're demanding more than is supplied. More people want it than what is available. That is a shortage. And then the next question is by how much is the shortage? We have to make that up. Well, that's going to be 6 units. So that'll be a shortage of 6 units. All right, so that's an effective price floor, or I'm sorry, ceiling. So let's do an example of a price floor next. Let me do an example here. That means we'll keep it at 2. So this is saying if we put a price floor at $2, right? What is a price floor by definition? It is you can't go below a certain price, like minimum wage. What's going on here? The government's saying you can't go below $2. However, the equilibrium price is at $10. So this is non-binding. It has no effect. Government's saying you can't sell below 2, but no one's selling it below 2. It's like government coming out with minimum wage saying you can't pay someone $2 an hour. Well, that's not happening. No one's getting paid $2 an hour. No one would want that. So it has no effect. So the only way a price floor would have any effect is if that price is above. So let's put that above equilibrium. I'm going to say $15. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that to 15. And now this is an effective price floor. So what we want to look at is, what is this? Well, that's quantity supplied. What is this? Quantity demanded. So we're demanding 3 units. We're supplying 13. So that's an effective price floor because I cannot go below. And it's above equilibrium. So that's going to work. Now what we want to do is plug our numbers in. So we're demanding 3. We're supplying 13. We're supplying more than what people are willing to pay at a higher price. People don't want it, but they're willing to supply more. Therefore, that's a that's a surplus of 10 units. That would be the 13 minus 3. All right, that's one way the government can affect things. And here's our next way. This is going to be our taxes. This is not robust because I wanted to make the demand curve more inelastic to show something. I'll show you how this works. All right, let's do this. We'll spend a little more time on it to explain it. We're looking at taxes here. So what we want to see is, now this is not robust. I had to change it. Of course, made it inelastic. So this example is, what if there's an $8 tax on suppliers? We're going to tax suppliers, and then we'll tax buyers. And we'll see what happens here. So we got a $3 tax on buyers, and we have an $8 tax on suppliers in this example. Let me see something really quick. All right. One thing I had to change, I forgot, was I have to do a tax on buyers the same value, not the 3. So let's do suppliers first. So a couple notes about suppliers. Anytime you tax a supplier, what you have is here's the supply curve with the tax. It must be above. So what's going on here is when you tax suppliers, remember this is the supply curve to produce the good. That never changes. And what happens is we have a new supply curve. It's going to shift up. And what that is going to be is supply plus the tax. Okay? It doesn't do away our original supply curve. The original supply curve is what they must receive in order to produce the goods. That's their cost. The new supply curve is to cover their costs plus cover the tax. And how much is it going to shift up? What's going to shift up exactly the amount of the tax? So what we have here is we have an $8 tax. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this curve exactly $8. Each box is 2. So what I'm going to look at right here, demerit point. So I'm going to look at here, let's say 2, 4, 6, 8. So, right? I just want to show how I did that. I did exactly, and you look at each point, it shifted exactly by $8 up. All right, so we're not going to produce, when you tax suppliers, we're not going to produce the amount that was at equilibrium when you tax suppliers, because if you want the supplier to produce this, they must receive $10 in order to produce 8 units. However, they got to pay that $8 tax. They're going to be losing a lot of money. So we have to look at, we have this somewhat new supply curve. Again, it doesn't do away the old supply curve. But what we're going to look at right here, at this equilibrium, buyers are paying $15, right? And I want to show you what's going on. It didn't do away the old supply curve. So if we produce 5 units, that would be how much units we'll produce. this is important that when you go down the original supply curve, that supply right there, that amount is the amount they must receive in order to produce 5 units. Right? They're receiving 15. So at that price, it covers the tax. That's the $8. That's the tax. And then it covers their cost. Right? They couldn't produce more. If they produced more units, they wouldn't be able to cover the costs. Look, if they produce, let's say, 6 units, look what happens to the demand curve. People are going to pay less, and it doesn't cover their costs. They have to pay the $8. It's going to go below their costs. Therefore, they can't produce that. So at this point, this covers the cost, and then there's the $8. That covers the tax. Okay? So let's plug some numbers in so we can make sense of it. So the quantity produced at that tax is going to be 5 units. The price that buyers pay, the price that buyers are paying for this is going to be the 15. So they're going to be paying 15. The price that suppliers receive, well, that 15, part of it's going to tax. The suppliers are receiving is 7 to cover the cost, because that right away goes right to the government. They're not receiving that 8. They're receiving the 7. So the buyers pay 15. 7 of it goes to the suppliers, and 8 of it goes to the government. Now we got to look at what about buyers are paying. What do I mean by that? How much tax of the 8 are buyers paying? Now this is important. And you can see I changed the curve so it's not going to be equal. So let's circle this. This was the original equilibrium. Buyers were paying $10 originally, right? And suppliers received $10. Now what buyers are paying, they're paying $15, right? So we taxed the supplier by 8. However, the buyer is paying 15. Therefore, if they're originally paying 10, that means the buyer is paying $5 of taxes, right? Of the 8, they had to pay $5 of taxes. The supplier was receiving $10 at equilibrium, and then we taxed them. Now they're receiving $7. That means the supplier is paying how much of the tax? They're receiving 10. Now they're receiving 7, so they're paying $3 of the tax. So look, 5 plus 3 is 8. That's the tax. The buyers are paying 5. Suppliers are paying the 3. Let me show you another example of what you can do here. So I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to move this curve out. When you get good with taxes, this is an easy way of doing it. So let me erase all of that. Okay, we have an $8 tax. What's the point of the $8 tax? How do you do this without the curve? All you're doing is, if it's an $8 tax, you must have the tax that is the gap between the supply curve, which is here, and the demand curve must be equal to the tax. That gap between the two must be equal to the tax. What we're looking at, where is the gap between this point and this point, between the supplier and the demander? Taxes drive a wedge between the supplier and the demander. So what we're doing is we're looking at where is that difference exactly of the tax. And if you look at this, that's 2, 4, 6, 8. Right at that point, 5 units has a gap exactly of 8 units, or $8. That will be the quantity. That's the wedge. That's where they come into an agreement, the supplier and the demander. At 5 units, we have a gap of $8. And look what's going on here. We have here, that's what the buyer's paying. You have here, that's what the supplier is receiving. And if I draw this box, that quantity of 5, and look what I could do here. I'm going to color this in. That here's that original equilibrium here of 10. So above that, I'm going to put this purple. Above that right here, this little box, that's the amount, the total amount of tax the buyers are paying. And if you look below that, make the different color. So the producers are receiving what, $7, and they're originally getting 10. So below that is at this point, this is the total amount of taxes that the supplier is paying. And if you combine both those together, that's the total tax. That's the $8. That's $8 height. And then it's the width of 5 units. 8 times 5 is the total taxes. 8 times 5. Consumers are paying 5. Suppliers are paying 3. All right, let's erase all this and let's do an example of what if we tax buyers of $8? Let's see the impact. Okay, so when we look at buyers, it's a little different than suppliers. I'm going to grab that tax on demanders here, the buyers. And what we want to do is, anytime we tax buyers, think about it. You go into Walmart and they're taxing you directly, not the supplier. Therefore, you look at a good, and what you're doing is you're willing to pay a certain price, and what you're doing, you're going to subtract out that tax. So if I want to buy a $20 football and they're going to put a $10 tax on footballs, I go, look, I'm willing to pay $20 for the football. Therefore, the seller must sell it to me for $10 because I have to pay a $10 tax. Therefore, our demand curve has a curve that shifts down. So what we have is it's demand minus the tax. That's how consumers look at things. We say, okay, you're going to sell to me that. You must sell minus the tax in order for me to buy it, if that's my demand curve. So we have a demand minus the tax that is below the demand curve. It shifts down, just like this. And what we want to do is shifts down exactly just like the supply curve according to the tax. It's shifting down to a total of the tax. Well, in this example, it's $8. So what you want to do is look at 2. So I'm going to go at this point, 2, 4. Doesn't matter what point when you look at it. So look, I'm right here, 2, 4. I'm sorry, 2, 4, 6, 8. So it's going to shift all the way down to that point. So I'm going to take my demand curve, I'm going to put it right at that point, right there. So it shifts exactly $8 down. That's how buyers look at it. Let me erase all that real quick. Okay, so we got this going on here. Now, why wouldn't we be at equilibrium at 8 units at $10, the original equilibrium? Because then consumers must pay, they're willing to buy this unit at this price from the sellers. It must be a lot lower because they have to pay the tax. If the seller charges 10, it's going to be way above what they're willing to pay, so they wouldn't do it. So what you have to do is you have to look at where the demand minus the tax is at equilibrium with the supply curve. And again, it doesn't do away with the old demand curve. I'll show you why, right? That's the price must pay. And look where we're at. We're at 5 units again. So let's plug that in. So quantity is 5 units. So this is the amount, if they're charged the tax, this is the quantity. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the original demand curve. This is the most they're willing to pay, right? Didn't do away with the original demand curve. So buyers are willing to pay $15. So it's almost like the same thing if you notice that suppliers and demanders. So buyers will pay $15. Well, what do sellers receive? Sellers are receiving this right here because that's their supply curve. Buyers are paying 15. Sellers are receiving 7, just like before. Nothing changed. And then we want to look at, well, how much are buyers paying of the tax? How much are sellers paying? Same exact thing. Buyers were originally paying $10, and now they're paying 15. So buyers are paying $5 of the tax. Sellers were originally receiving $10 and now they're receiving $7. So sellers are paying $3 of the tax. And I'll end it with my final part I want to talk about here. 5 plus 3 is the $8 tax. And let me just take that out really quick. And let me, again, I think this is the easiest way once you get good at graphs. Instead of shifting curves up or down and get a little confused on the supply curve, demand curve, how it shifts. It doesn't matter. So this is the whole purpose of it, or the whole point of it. It doesn't matter if you tax suppliers. It doesn't matter if you tax demanders. The point is, whatever the tax is, you must find that difference, that distance between the supply curve and the demand curve. That's the agreement. That's where demanders are willing to pay. This is suppliers willing to receive. That must be the tax. So it doesn't matter if you tax suppliers, demanders, you are always at the same point. And it doesn't matter who you tax, the buyers will pay the same amount of the tax, so sellers will pay the same amount of tax. And what does it depend on? It depends on the curve of the shape of the curve. So as I make this more inelastic, buyers are paying more of the tax. As I make this more elastic, sellers are paying more of the tax. It has to do with their curve. Is it elastic or inelastic will depend on the tax. And if I want to show this really quick with the supply curve, if the supply curve becomes more inelastic, they're going to pay the majority of the tax. If the supply curve becomes more elastic, the demanders pay more of the tax. If that's confusing, I just want to end it with this. Elasticity, what does it mean? If you're more inelastic, price has no effect. You're still going to purchase it, which means you're willing to pay the tax. If you're more elastic, you're more price sensitive, which means you're going to get out of that good. If you raise that price by 10 cents, I don't want the good. That means the supplier must pick up the tax then if demanders are more elastic. Well, there you go. Any questions, please leave comments. Thank you for listening, and God bless.